Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about bringing our own code to Power Pages. So what does that mean? So in this tutorial, I'm going to build a React-based single page application, and then we're going to post it in Power Pages. So this is a new feature currently in preview. It's part of the new wave of the Vibe Engineering Pro Code Power Apps, much like Generative Pages and vibe.powerapps.com. But why React? So we're seeing all of these vibe coding tools creating React. Well, React is a framework that allows us to build websites that act like web applications. So that's pretty cool. So instead of those full page reloads that you see in like traditional Power Pages sites, we're going to interact with a single page application that's going to transition smoothly to show us different static and dynamic information. So what React essentially does, very simply, it updates the user interface based on the data and doesn't directly manipulate the dynamic object model. So when we create a React application, instead of creating a series of HTML pages, which is essentially how Power Pages works today, we instead are going to create a series of reusable JavaScript components that define the user interface and output HTML. So every time the data changes, React will update the state and change the user interface. So this is going to allow us to build websites with rich user experiences on top of the Power Platform and Dataverse. And we're going to take advantage of those Power Pages features like app hosting, security, and authentication. So building a React site is typically a pro code solution. However, using Vibe engineering tools like GitHub Copilot and other AI-assisted app building tools, we're going to have the ability to create amazing web applications, which I think is well within the reach of just everyday makers. So we're going to create a simple application. Let's walk through it. All right, so this is a very simple application that I created using React, and I built this in Visual Studio Code, but I'm actually hosting it in Power Pages. So as you can see here, if I have my home page, if I go and select another page, if I choose the About Us, you see that it's extremely smooth. I didn't actually go through a full page reload. It's actually was able to show that pretty dynamically. The other cool thing is that I can actually incorporate this to load Dataverse data, and that's something we're going to get into as well. The other thing that we can do is implement things like authentication. So here I've tied this website into using Entra external IDs. So all I need to do is sign in. And then you'll see that I have signed in now. And then what I can do as well is also I'm able to view Dataverse data. So I've created this other page that's actually reading from a Dataverse table, and it's going to display it on the screen. So we see here a couple records that I have in my Dataverse table. So I'm going to go through the whole process to create this site. It's actually pretty straightforward. It is hosted completely within Power Pages. So we have things like our security built in, our authentication, the ability to talk to Dataverse. But then for the rest, with this React site, sky's the limit on how we design it, how we build it, how we do the user interface. So it gives us a lot of capabilities and a lot of flexibility in building powerful sites. Now, just so you know, this is still in preview, so this is not quite ready for production yet, but this is evolving, and this is how I see the future of building applications, especially in the Power Platform, going to be happening. Low code, the ultimate form of low code is natural language. So we're going to be using natural language to directly build professional code. And then the pro coders are going to be able to go in and manipulate and tweak that code very much like they do now. But it's going to be less of a black box. It's going to be much more approachable, and we're going to be able to build some amazing apps, applications, agents, and websites. All right, so let's get into building something. I'm using Visual Studio Code. Now that's a free tool from Microsoft. If you don't have it installed already, you can go to VS Code and you can do a search and download it. It can run on both Mac and Windows, and I believe Linux as well. I'm not quite sure. I'm sure someone will correct me on that. The other thing we're going to be installing is node.js. Now, this also has an installer, so we'll be able to run that. That's going to give us the libraries and the packages that we're going to be able to be used to build our React-based websites. We're also going to be using something called Vite. Vite is a tool, another library to help us create React sites a little bit faster. Maybe someday I will do a video on Vite, but for now, just trust me, that's what we're going to use. So first thing I'm going to do is once I load up Visual Studio Code, I actually do have GitHub Copilot here as well, is I am going to run the command to create my site. So we're basically, if we take a look at the command line, npm create. So basically it means we're going to create a package. I'm going to use vit at latest, and then I'm calling my site Dyn-Events. And I'm going to use the template, the React-based template. So once I got that command line in, let's just hit enter. And basically it's going to ask me a series of questions. Do I want my package named Dyn-Events? Yes, I'm just going to hit tab. That's going to accept that. Do I want to use roll down vit, the experimental version? No, I don't want to use anything too experimental at this point. We're experimenting enough as it is. Do we want to install with npm and actually start it up now? Yeah, why not? Let's give it a shot. And basically it's creating that scaffolding. What I mean by scaffolding, it's creating those files, that folder structure that's specific to React-based sites. So we're going to want that, and let it run through the process. It's gone now. It's actually up and running this. So if I were just to go and select that local host, that means it's running locally on my machine. We should be able to see the site that we've created. And yeah, we have a very simple site. It's showing the Vit and the React-based logos. I could select those and that will take me to the site to learn more. I can just hit the count button here. And this is sort of how React works. It's a state machine. Basically, we're kicking off a script to update a global variable called count. But what it's also doing, it's not necessarily refreshing the page or doing a page submit. It's actually React is taking that state and reflecting that on our user interface. Well, this is pretty cool. It doesn't do much. Let's start building our own site. All right, I've opened up this folder in Visual Studio Code. So we can see under my workspace, I have the Dyn-Events. I have a whole bunch of different folders, things that we want to look for that we see in pretty much every React application. There's a main file, which is pretty straightforward. We also have our index.html, which of course, any website, index.html is usually the default one that gets loaded. We basically see here that it's actually beginning to load some of the libraries and showing us the main.jsx, which is again, React building components. Let's look under that first component. Main.js is just really going through the steps of loading React and loading the React DOM client, and then importing the CSS, and then also the app.jsx. App.jsx is really where most of the heavy lifting happens in a React app. So we see here I have a function, like a JavaScript function, and it's returning, it's using that state, remember that count that we're doing? So that is what I mean by some of the state machines that React uses. And it's returning what looks like HTML, and it's returning, remember that Vit and that React Dev with the logos, and we're having some other some basic HTML and a card. And then we have the count here. So we see every time that we're doing an on click, that's updating the count. Now what that's doing, what React is doing, is taking that state because the data is changed and changing the user interface, and a few other things along that. That's all well and good, but we actually want to create an app that's specific that we want to host in Power Pages. Now, I can host this in Power Pages, but it doesn't do too much. So the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to basically go into my agent and I'm going to load my first prompt. So basically what I'm going to be creating is this dynamics event. I want a header, I want a footer, I want a body, I want to be able to have a menu item that we can navigate, and a few other things. So I'm basically going to grab my first prompt and put that in. All right, so I've created a prompt. Basically, I'm saying create an event website for a company called Dynamic Events using React and Vit. The requirements are use React router for navigation. That React router means if I'm selecting the menu, I'm routing to those different components. So really showing those different pages that aren't really pages. Create a fixed header at the very top, spanning the full width with the name company Dynamic Events on the left, a navigation menu with a home, about us, and sessions. So we want to have those values on the right. All the same line. I'm saying use a red, black, and white color scheme. It's my favorite color scheme. A footer fixed to the bottom, full width, styled in the same color scheme, and display the copyright. That's pretty cool. And then the home page should have a warm, generic welcome message and a brief description of company services. Again, letting the generative AI have a little bit of free reign here. And then an about us page, a session page, and then making sure that the header doesn't overlap the body content, and using clean, modern CSS for all components, and ensure the layout is responsive and visually cohesive. Place all the components and pages in appropriate folders. Do not include any default Vit or React demo content like we had. This prompt, basically, I came to it. I basically recreated this site earlier. And then as I went through each step, I asked GitHub Copilot to create the prompt for me. So this is something as a maker, you're getting into React and building sites is something I've been doing is once you've created something that works, because it's going to be a lot of iteration and back and forth, but if you want to recreate it again, like maybe for a video or something, it's actually good to ask GitHub Copilot to create the prompt that it would use to have created that thing, so you don't have to go through that whole iterative process again. Just a little tip. So let's kick this off. And again, I'm using agent mode here. I basically want the agent to go through a series of steps and do some thinking to create this particular application. All right, so part of this too, as I'm going through this process, it's going to want to install the React Router DOM. Yep, I'm going to allow that. I'll allow it. And we see here it's thinking, it's going through that whole process. So in a sense, this is vibe coding. I'm actually giving the work over to a junior developer to go and build this now. We still want to make sure we want to know what's going on, and we kind of can supervise this whole process as the agent is going out and creating these particular things. It's also a good way to learn. This is how I've been learning React. I will fully admit I am not a React expert. I am learning just like the rest of you, and this is part of my process, is going through and creating these applications and seeing what GitHub Copilot is creating for me. So we're beginning to see some things light up here. It is making some changes. It is creating some files, and it's still thinking about it. So we're going to let it go through its entire process. All right, so we see that after a few minutes that the event website is fully implemented according to our requirements. The React router is set up. The fixed header is done. The header information, the footer's been styled. We have the home, about us, and session pages or components created. We have the layouts responsive with modern CSS, and it's removed the demo content. Now, nothing has yet changed, so we have these things. So again, I can go through and look, see what the changes are made here. So we see here that it's replaced some of this stuff. I can go through each one individually and see what was done. This is a great way to learn React, to understand what's been going on, what's been implemented. It's almost like your developers kind of showing their work. Just to speed things up, I'm just going to keep everything. And as soon as we keep all that, we see that everything has been updated. But if I were to even look at the app.js, I can see it's importing a lot of these different components. It's also importing the CSS. And now instead of it returning that Vit and React demo data, it's going to be returning information about the homepage, the About Us, the sessions. And again, these are all different components that it's going to be displaying. So this is great. We have the different elements. We have different assets. So let's take a look to see what this looks like. Now, we don't have to upload this to Power Pages right away. We can continue to run this locally. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, all right, now we'll build our site. Let's take a look to see what it looks like now that we've added all of these new pages and things. I'm going to go through and run build it again. It's gone through. Now, if you get any error messages here, and I just did and actually cleaned it up, is what you can do is you can feed that into GitHub Copilot. It will go through and try to resolve those for you. So again, I had some CSS issues that was on the cause of the build. Anyways, GitHub Copilot was able to resolve those for me. Now, that's all well and good. Let's see what this site actually looks like. So again, I'm going to type npm run preview. We're going to have that local host. And here's our site. Dynamics events. It's red, white, and black as we hoped. We have the menu here. We have the home page, selecting the About Us. We see how quick that transitioned. If I click on the sessions, it's filled in some interesting event sessions. Eventually, we are going to replace this with our information from our Dataverse table. So this looks pretty good. So the next thing what we can do is we can upload this into Power Pages. All right, so we have our site created. We've took a look at it. It looks pretty good. So now we're going to upload it into Power Pages. So how do we do that? So this is where we're using the Pack CLI. The Pack is the Power Platform build tools. If you haven't already installed it, if you go to the extensions in VS Code, you can just do a quick search on it, and you should see the Power Platform tools and install those. Once you have those, you're going to be able to run a lot of different commands. The other thing that you'll need to do once you have this installed is make sure that you are logged into the particular environment that you're logged into. If you don't know how to do that, I've done other videos. It's pack auth create, and you're going to pass it the environment ID, and then you're going to sign in, be authenticated to the particular environment to which you want to upload this site. Now, make sure this is a dev or a sandbox environment. Do not be loading this into your production environment at this time. So we have basically, I'm just going to close the extension information here. So on our terminal here, let me just widen that up a little bit. We can get up Copilot out of the way. Using pack pages. Now this could be pack PA portals or pack power pages or pack pages. It's gone through a lot of different names. Microsoft likes to rename things, as we know. We're using the command upload-code.site. So that upload code site is going to indicate to Power Pages we're uploading the code site. We want to choose the root path. The root path is basically the folder that got created when we created our React site. The compiled path is the distribution folder. So we have this distribution folder. This is where those mimified assets are going to be created. So this is effectively what we're going to be uploading. We need to identify that. And then also the site name, I'm just going to call it Dine Events. So once we have all that information, then what we're going to do is we're going to upload the site. Now, just keep an eye on our folder structure here, because a few things are going to happen. First off, it's going to load up this site into our Power Pages, basically, and then it's also going to update our project here to have a lot of Power Pages components. All right, so we see here that the process is completed. We've uploaded these changes into Power Pages. So now we're going to go over to the Power Pages into that environment and see what's going on there. All right, so I went to the Power Pages homepage. I've chosen my environment. This is the environment that I had my authentication profile set up within Visual Studio Code. Now, I've already had this site that I created earlier. If I go to my inactive sites, this is where I'm going to initially see the site that first gets uploaded into Power Pages. At this point, the site really isn't created yet in terms of the Azure web app that actually displays and hosts the Power Pages sites. It is uploaded into Dataverse. So what we're going to do is reactivate this site, and it's going to be very much like any other process. It's going to ask for the name. I'm just going to leave the defaults for now. We're going to just choose done, and it's going to go through and reactivating the site. What effectively that means is it's taking that basic React site and it's actually going to be hosting that within that Azure web app. So of course, at this point, this is giving us a couple things. First off, it's giving us a place to host this site. When we build React apps, we're going to have to host them somewhere. That could be in a static Azure web app or some other hosting environment. By doing it within Power Pages, it is being hosted on an Azure website, but what it's also giving us is the ability to turn on authentication, to be able to interact with Dataverse, to be able to use a lot of those other Power Pages features that we wouldn't have access to if we just uploaded it somewhere. So at this point, what we're going to do is take a look at that site. Now, a couple hints are coming up here. If you're looking at the Design Studio, we're going to see it is going to be highlighted as a single page application. The other thing is here, you'll notice that the Pages workspace and the Styling workspace are grayed out. A couple reasons here is we can't really manipulate or add pages to our React-based site. It's kind of an all or nothing experience. Same with styling. So this really is a pro code site. You're literally bringing your code into Power Pages. We do have the ability to look at the data because we are going to be looking at the Dataverse tables in a bit. We have the setup website. So all of those other things that we have here are sort of the setup workspace and also the security workspace, because we're going to need to be able to work with that to be able to give access to our Dataverse. The site visibility is still going to be set to private, so we are going to get that bar across the top. So let's actually give this a second here, and let's actually take a look at our site and see what it looks like. All right, so the very first time we launch the site, we are going to get this permissions requested. That's really for the app registration to give the permission to be able from Dataverse to talk to this web app. Basically, we'll consent. That's only a one-time thing. You'll see this on regular Power Pages sites as well. All right, so we have our site. It's sitting in Power Pages. We can see from the URL it is at a .powerapps.portals.com. We do have the banner about the site being private. It is covering up our header a little bit. It is what it is. So basically we can see here there's a site. If I choose the About Us, takes us to the About Us page and sessions. So really it's the same thing that we're running locally, but now we have it hosted in Power Pages. So far, we haven't really done anything too radical here. We've created a React-based site. We've kind of styled it a little bit. We have some static information, and then we've uploaded this into Power Pages. The next thing we want to do is to be able to display Dataverse data on our particular Power Pages site, on our React-based site by bringing our own code. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the Power Pages web API to interact with Dataverse. So let's go through the process of setting that up. All right, so now what we want to do is, now that we've created our React website, what we want to do is display Dataverse data. Now, like I mentioned at the tail end of the last section, we do need to use the Dataverse or the Power Pages web API. Now, a couple things we need to do. So first off, here's the table that we want to show. It's called session. It's displaying a bunch of session names that you typically see at an event. I want to take this information and display this on our React-based website, but we have to do that through code. So a couple things we need to do here is, first off, this is the table name. So I am going to have to capture the properties of our table, turn the logical name of the table itself, along with the logical name of the particular columns that I want to display. Now, very much the same with we're using the Portal Web API in a traditional Power Pages site, we're going to need to set up the site settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and launch the Power Pages management app. So a quick little refresher on that. That is the model-driven app that you can use to manipulate Power Pages metadata. And it's also true for Power Pages if they are written as a code-first application that we're bringing into our Power Pages site. Now, of course, there's a lot of things that we can't do, like adding web pages and templates like we mentioned earlier. But what we can do on our particular site is set up things like site settings. So I'm into my website record. I'm going to go into the site settings, and I'm going to go in and find the web. And I've set these up earlier. So of course the web API site settings, web API / and the name of my table, it's docs_session. We see those here. I'm enabling it. That's set to true. And then here I'm defining the column name. So let's just take a quick look at this. We need to make sure that we're specifying this particular column names that we're going to expose with the Power Pages web API. Now, some of you might be tempted to use the star here, which is going to expose all the columns. Try to just define just the columns that you want to use, just more for security and just best practices. So now that we have that set up, that part is done. The other thing we need to do now is go back into our code and be able to add the components that we need to be able to read from Dataverse using the Portal Web API and displaying that onto our page. All right, so if you've created Power Pages code before using the Power Pages web API, you do know you need to, what you typically do is add that web API helper file. I tend to like to add it to a web template, and that helper file basically is that interface into the Dataverse web API that we're going to use through Power Pages about passing the token, making sure that whatever site is calling it is properly authenticated. And so typically what we do is we create this helper file in our projects. Our React-based website is no different. We're going to need that helper file. I'm going to add that as an API interface, and we're going to refer to that as we're reading information from Dataverse. Again, I'm just going to get the agent to build it. I'm going to give it a prompt. All right, so basically I've, generated JavaScript helper module within this project in an API folder for the Power Pages web API integration called portalapi.js. Gives a bunch of references and requirements. I won't really go into the nitty gritty of what this does. There's plenty of other information around that. Basically, it works the exact same way as our regular Power Pages web API, which of course is a subset of the Dataverse API. So we see here it did create the helper in the API folder. That's great. Gave some information about the code and how it all works. I'm basically going to keep this, so we have access to that now. That's good, it's now part of our code. So the next thing we're going to need to do, now that we have that helper file in place, is we're going to be able to want to retrieve that session information and display that on the session page. So if I expand out our components, or our pages rather, we do see we have a sessions.jsx page. If you recall, when we looked at it, it has a bunch of static information in here. What we're going to want to do is replace that with our Dataverse code that's going to retrieve the session information and display it in a nice format. I have a prompt ready for this, and basically we're going to plug that in. All right, so I have my prompt. Basically, I'm saying it replace the code in this page. It's going to reference the portal API.js, which we've already created already. The goal is to read all records from a Dataverse table called doc session. Notice I am putting in the logical names here and retrieve the fields called doc session name and doc session description. And it goes on to discuss about how basically I want to format that output. So basically, let's just kick that off. And again, our agent now is going to take a look at this particular file and rewrite it according to our requirements. All right, so we see after a few moments, it basically described it. It's now fetching those doc session records using the portal fetch JSON via the portal web API file, giving it a bold heading, less justified, clean, clear, regular React. We see here it's replacing all of this. I'm just going to keep all our changes. And now we have this new session screen, and we're going to see here on the return, it's going to be outputting this in an unstructured list with the title being bold and the description being in a paragraph as we described. So this is all good. Now my next step, let's take a look at what this is going to look like in our Power Pages site. So I'm going to go back down to the terminal, same thing. I'm going to rebuild this. Run build. And then the other thing I'm going to do is upload this into Power Pages. Now, what I could do is I could try to preview it locally. However, this isn't going to work because the local session doesn't have the proper authentication to talk to Power Pages within its context. There is a way to do that. I'll probably do this in a later video, but for now we're going to upload this into Power Pages to see what it looks like. So I'm going to, once again, Power Pages, upload site, root path, compiled path, and the site name. I'm using shortcuts here. All right, so our site's now been uploaded. Let's take a look. Now, before we can preview our site, remember that the whole point of uploading this into Power Pages is that we can use Power Pages capabilities, such as security. So what we are going to need to do in order to view Dataverse data is set up table permissions. So I'm going to set up a brand new permission. I am in the Power Pages Design Studio. I'm just going to call this Sessions. We're going to choose our session table. I'm going to give it global access for now. I'm going to choose read, and I'm going to allow both anonymous and authenticated users to be able to view that data. Of course, we're going to get all sorts of warning messages about data being displayed. This is okay. The session data is public data. I'm just going to save that. Again, warning messages. And basically, we would create table permissions the same way that we would in a traditional Power Pages site. So this is one of the great things about using bringing your own code is it is using the benefits of Power Pages, especially around data security. All right, now that we have our table permissions set up, what we're going to do now is let's preview the site and see what happens. All right, we have our Dynamics event site up. Let's choose Sessions. And we see that it actually read from our Dataverse table and display that information on the screen. Now, of course, we're not signed in. Anonymous users can view this, which is fine, but eventually you're going to get to a point where you're going to want to protect that Dataverse data through authentication. So the next thing we're going to explore is to set up the authentication process for our Power Pages site or our React-based website that's being hosted within Power Pages. So this is taking advantage of some of the capabilities that Power Pages gives us, such as the built-in authentication. So one of the benefits of uploading your React site into Power Pages, of course, utilizing things like the table permissions that we looked at, also being able to use the Dataverse Power Pages web API. But the other thing is authentication, because we're going to want our users to be able to authenticate. Now, if we look into the Design Studio under the security workspace, we have a bunch of different authentication providers. Of course, there's local sign-in, Microsoft Entra ID. What I'm going to do is I'm going to disable those. And what we're going to do is configure the Microsoft Entra external ID. Now, to configure this is the exact same process as you would a regular Power Pages site. I do have another video on this that you can check out on how to set this up. And then once you've done setting this part up, then we're going to be able to take that information and use it to update our React website code to be able to have its own sign in, sign out button, and for users to be able to authenticate using this mechanism. All right, I've configured my Microsoft Entra external ID. I've set it to be the default. And the thing I've captured is the authority. We're going to need that as part of our prompt when we're creating our code for the next step. So let's go back into Visual Studio Code and create our sign in, sign out buttons and the authentication configuration. All right, I have a very long prompt in here, and the reason why it's for long, the first time I went through and created this, I had to reiterate quite a bit because there are some little nuances to how the authentication works in Power Pages, specifically with Entra External ID and implementing this in a React site. So I think I've captured all the details. Effectively, my prompt is I want to implement Entra External ID to the site. The provider authority is I'm giving it the provider authority, telling it should store it as an environment variable. Now note that this is a React website environment variable, not a Dataverse environment variable. We don't have access to those yet, unfortunately. And basically going through talking about the current user being Microsoft.Dynamics365.Portal user object. These types of things are in the documentation, but I'm just spelling it out for GitHub Copilot to know what to do. So let's kick off this prompt. And basically what I'm doing is I'm telling it to create a sign in and a sign out button, telling it to create the link to the authorization in an environment variable, and also providing the URLs. So let it go through and do the process. All right, so it's gone through the process here. It's implemented. It's basically had the environment variable set up. It's using the get portal utility. It's updated the header. Going to display the username. A whole bunch of things that I've given it to do. Let's keep all of these changes. And it's added a bunch of code to our header.jsx file. It's also, I believe, added some to the app.js. Actually, no, it didn't, just to the header. So all our updates are done here. It's good to take a look through all of this. We can see it's calling this get portal user to make sure that the portal user is logged in using the signing authority, and also about the login, the logout, and the sign in authority as well. So let's actually build this and upload this into Power Pages. Again, because it is needing to be loaded into Power Pages to utilize this, if I were to try to run it locally, I would get an error message. So let's load and see what happens. All right, now that we've uploaded the site, with our identity provider, let's do a preview. And here we see our site. Basically, you notice that the layout did change a little bit. So when I added those things, the sign in, the sign out button to the header, it actually made a few modifications. So I had to go in and fix some of that stuff to the best of my ability in the short time that we have. Basically, that's really not the point. First off, we now have a sign in button. If I choose this, it is going to go through the regular sign in page. I'm going to choose Microsoft Entra External ID. And I have signed in earlier with that, but if not, it would have prompted me for the Entra External ID login. I do now see that I am signed in as myself, which is great, and I can just quickly sign out as well. All right, so now that we have that sign in and the sign of the authentication, now we can tie into creating custom web roles or tie it into table permissions that we can only see certain subsets of data. All right, let's wrap this up. So basically, we've created our site using React. We've uploaded into Power Pages. We've created the ability to read Dataverse information. And we've also integrated authentication. So now we can tie this all together so that our logged in users are set to only be allowed to what they need to see. So in our example, I basically take our session information. I've assigned it to me as the logged in user, and I'm going to configure the security such that only I'm allowed to see the sessions that belong to me. So there could be a lot of use case scenarios, like take a look at your support cases, your invoices, your membership information. A lot of that information can be controlled using table permissions, much they can in traditional Power Pages sites. It's the same process to use for your own React-based websites. So here on the security page, I'm in the security workspace. I've looked at my table permissions. I've modified that table permission that we set up earlier. Basically, we're only going to give it contact access based on the relationship that's part of Dataverse. And again, just read permission for now. But for the roles, I'm only choosing authenticated users. So if a non-authenticated user attempts to read that page, they're basically going to be getting an error message. Now, we should probably clean up the code to give it a much more friendlier message. But let's take a look at what the results are. All right, so I'm into my Dynamics events page. This is my website that I created. I'm now signed in as my user. Let's take a look at the sessions. And then we see here just the sessions that I'm linked as a speaker to. So it's limited, the table permission has limited to what Dataverse information I can see. So overall, the ability to create a React-based website or create a website using the React framework and some of these other frameworks gives us the ability to basically build almost any scenario that we want, but then we're also having the benefit of using the Power Pages features. Now, I keep reiterating that, but it's really the merging of two powerful technologies. So what kind of applications or websites are you going to build? Be very interested to hear about it. Thanks for watching this video, and I look forward to the next one.